Okay, so now I'm going to talk about redoing the beds. This is one of the beds that came with it. This is just some kind of cardboard. You can actually squish it quite easily, and it's just covered in clear cloth, and then they just made a mattress with foam. Now, working with the Kaleidoscope House, look at all the colors that you can play around with because it's such a bright and colorful house. So this is one bed that I made. I printed this fabric off with little skulls, and it was supposed to be hot pink, but I just put the hot pink in between, made these little pillows, and I made a bed skirt so it comes off. And I'm quite happy with that. This is the one I'm going to use in the little girl's room. This is my first one that I did, and I tried printing, and you can just see that the colors are not very bright. It's a cute enough bed, but I wanted a bit more brightness. And this is a mattress that I sewed up myself and made all the bedding here. And then this last one was what I was going to use for the little boy's room. And again, I printed this onto this lime green, and it didn't come out very, because it's supposed to be bright orange. So I tried putting it through the printer twice, and it didn't quite line up, so it's quite blurry. And this material that I used is like a really shiny material, and I tried to just glue it down, and it doesn't look that good. So I would recommend maybe using double-sided sticky tape, or maybe hot glue would have been better, but you don't see it once the bed's up and on. So this is the color I wanted the little boy's room, but I didn't have a lime green felt for the wallpaper, so now it's changed, and it's going to be orange and yellow, nice and bright. Okay, so how they done it in the Kaleidoscope House is they have the sheet come around the edge of the bed and flip over, so it's got a nice clean edge, and then it's not, you don't see the mattress at all. So the way that I managed to do that was flip it up, just make sure I have enough to go, enough on all the edges. And then, so I've got more than enough to do all the edges to come up and over. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this edge over and sew it around all four corners, and then I'll come back. Okay, so I sewed a really quick edge. It doesn't have to be fancy because it's going to be underneath. I'm going to put this to the center, just make sure I have enough to fold it up on all the edges again, which I do. So my simplest way was just to cut straight down to the corner like this, and cut my wedge out, and then I take it off and sew this edge. I do that to, I lay this down and I do that to all four corners, and then I sew it up. I'll come back when that's done. Okay, I have all four corners sewn together. So now I'm just going to take it onto the mattress and flip it around. Alright, so you see I've got lots. So all I'm going to do is fold them over like this. I've got a needle and thread, and just tuck down all four of the corners. This is the underneath part, so no one's going to see this. Alright, so now you've got the little so now you've got the bed, and this is not going anywhere. So there's the mattress. So I want to make pillows to go with this sheet, So first thing I'm going to do is fold this edge and sew it, and then I'll be back. Okay, so I've sewed a seam along one whole edge here, and now I'm taking apart one of the little pillows, and this is going to be the pillowcase, so I'm just trying to see, flip it over, because I'll want to put another edge on this side as well. So I'm just going to cut it a little bit bigger. And now I'm going to sew a seam on this side as well. Okay, so now I have a seam on both sides. That just gives me a finished edge. So now I'm going to flip it back so that the rough edges are out. And then I'm going to take the pillow. Okay, I'm laying it down. This is my template. You can see that it's pretty good. And give it a little bit of extra for seam allowance. So I'm going to get two the exact same size and then sew them. Now I'll sew down both edges and then flip it around. Okay, so now I've sewn it together, and see, I gave it quite a lot of seam allowance, so trim your edges, clip your corners and your little threads. Now if I'd used a colored thread, you wouldn't be seeing this, but I wanted it to show up for you guys. Trim these little now flip it around. Make sure you get the little corners make sure you get the little corners out properly. So there's our little pillowcase. I'm going to do the same thing with white, make it a tiny bit thinner, and that'll be the pillow. So when I get it to this point, I'll come back, because then I'll just be stuffing it with polyfill and stitching the edge closed. Okay, so I've sewn up a whole bunch of these cases for the pillows, and I've turned a couple of them around. This one I've already filled with foam. I don't have very much polyfill, so I'm just using foam. I just have scrap foam, and I've just cut a little chunk of it, and I just squish it together and get it put into the pillowcase. Get something to help you press it into the edges. So get it pressed in and get it laying fairly flat. This one's nice and flat. I'll work on that one in a bit. And of course the other way is to just use polyfill. And it's not hard. And you might need something to help press it in, because your fingers are kind of big for this. And same with that, get it nice and, fill it up so it's a nice plump little pillow, and then you're going to slip stitch the edge closed. Because I had sewn the edge over, when you slip stitch it closed, it's got a nice finished seam and it won't fray. I'll finish up sewing these later. So I'm working on the bed for the little boy's room. This is the first one I did, but I couldn't match the wallpaper up, so I'm making one with fluorescent orange and fluorescent yellow. But when I went to sew these together, you see the orange through it. So I'm going to use this in between. So I'm going to lay the flannel down and make sure I have the right sides together. And then I'm going to stitch up and around and leave a little opening at the bottom, and I will flip it all around. I'll come back. Okay, I have it sewn around all 4 edges and I've trimmed it. I guess trim the corners a little bit. And it's sewn it now, and I've clipped the corners. So now I'm just going to flip it around, push out my corners, and then you can either stitch or glue this end down. Okay, so all the beds that came with the Kaleidoscope House are doubles, and I need to make one for Mom and Dad, so I'm going to make their bed a little bit bigger. So I found a piece of foam. It's maybe a ½ inch wider, and it's quite a bit longer, but I'm going to cut it down and make a bit bigger bed for Mom and Dad. So I'm going to use my straight edge. And then I'm just going to take my X-Acto knife so now I have a bed that's just a bit bigger. So we'll say this is our queen size bed. Mattress cover. I'm going to sew it the same as what I did the pillowcase. Make sure I have enough to come up and over. So you see we've got a bit bigger bed for Mom and Dad, a little bit wider and a little bit longer. So I've got this piece cut out, ready to go for the mattress. It's going to be sewn up very similar to the pillowcases, and I just want to make sure it overlaps here. So now my next step will be to fold these edges. So I have a finished edge here, and I will do it on this side as well. Okay, so I've got these seams on either side, and they'll meet up here so I can sew it shut. So I've inserted the foam, and you can see here that there's lots of material. This way, if I'll err on the side of caution and start maybe here or work my way in. I used to try to measure more, and I used to make a lot of mistakes, and I had a lot of wasted. So I'm just going to pin where I think my seam should be, top and bottom. Just a rough guideline. Okay. So now before I cut anything, I'm just going to do a quick fit, because if I didn't make it wide enough, or if it's not thin enough and it's too loose, then I can just take the seam out and I don't have to start with a new piece of material again. Oh, looks pretty good. And if I fold this over when I stitch it, alright, so I'm going to trim this off, turn this around, and slip stitch it closed. Okay, so I have the edge sewn in. It's turned out pretty good. Last thing I'm going to do is just put a few stitches through it, just like how this one is kind of quilted. So just put a few through. Through and put it between the thread so that it catches on the knot and it doesn't pull through. Then I tighten it down and do one more knot on top and trim it. So there is our new mattress. So now we need the box spring, or the base. I'm going to take the mattress that we made, lay it on top, make sure it's nice and flush, take a pencil, trace, then I'll use my straight edge to make this even. So the line's crooked, so I'm just going to use my straight edge, make it even. Now I'll put this back on top and make sure that it's pretty good. So I'm going to cut this out another 3 times. So this is the same height as the box spring that came with the Kaleidoscope House. This one's covered with fabric. They've sewn it on. You can sew it on. It would be very similar to the mattress. You just wouldn't put the tufts in it. Or you can just glue it down. And all I did to keep these together was just use glue stick quite liberally between each layer. And then just let it dry like that before I covered it. So I will finish that off screen. Okay, this is the mom's and dad's bed that I made. I ended up making it pretty much the same size as the other double beds for the Kaleidoscope House because there's not a lot of room in the dollhouse for a bigger bed. So I had showed you how I glued the stack of foam core together and I've covered it. And then to make this headboard, I put a bit of foam underneath here, and then I just put a picture down and used I just put the picture down and then I put stick pins and pushed them all the way through to make this skull. And then when I pulled it through to the back, I took my clippers and clipped them off, and then I just ran a bead of glue around to hold it in place. Glued the headboard on. I put the glue in and then I just put a few stick pins through here just to hold it in place. So I'm going to leave them in there for now. So that's the base and the headboard of the bed. I wanted to have quite a lot of colors in Mom's and Dad's bedroom. My first thought was I cut all these into squares and I put them on a piece of paper with double-sided sticky tape, and then I put it straight down onto the onto my printer and copied it, but you can see that the green did not, the other colors are pretty good, but the green didn't show up as bright. So then I didn't use it this way. I decided to use fusible interfacing with the iron, and I laid it on top and quickly pressed it down, and then I sewed the base on, but you can see it's quite firm. And then I just took and did a zigzag stitch to finish off the edges. So I took all these bright colors so they'll match the wallpaper that I put into the room. And then I had a lot of fun making all these different little colored pillows to put on Mom's and Dad's bed. I thought it turned out quite cute. So that's it for my beds. I've got all the beds made now for the dollhouse. Next we'll be going on to flooring.